Objective, Pythagorean theorem. Definition number 1. Pythagorean theorem describes the relationship of the lengths of the sides of a right triangle. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Here you can see a triangle. It is a right triangle. The right angle is labeled. C is called the hypotenuse. This side is A, it is a leg, and this side is B, it is also called a leg. Definition number 2, the hypotenuse. In a right triangle, the side opposite of the right angle is always the longest side. So in this picture, the hypotenuse is longer than sides A and B, than both the legs. Definition number 3, the leg. Sides that form the right angle. So here's the right angle, and side A and B are both called legs because they meet to make that right angle. Definition number 4, Pythagorean triple. When all of the sides of a right triangle are whole numbers. So sides A, B, and C will all be whole numbers. No fractions, no decimals, no irrational numbers. All whole numbers make a Pythagorean triple. Find the missing sides of a right triangle. Example number 1. Here we have x as the hypotenuse, 16 and 12 are the legs. So we're going to use a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So it doesn't matter which side you call A and which one you call B, but C is always opposite of the right angle, and it is always the hypotenuse. So we're going to substitute 16 squared, because A is 16, plus, because there's a plus in our formula, 12, it gets squared because B is squared, equals, now we're calling C x, so x squared. 16 squared, you can do this on your calculator, 256, plus 12 squared, which is 144, and 256 plus 144 is going to equal x squared. So if you combine these, you should get 400. 400 equals x squared. Now to undo something to the second power, we take the square root. If you do the square root on the left side of the equal sign, you do the same thing to the right side. So a square root and a squared cancel each other out, and we have x. The square root of 400 is 20. So x equals 20, which means our hypotenuse is 20. Okay. So 16, 12, and 20 would be a Pythagorean triple because they are all whole numbers. Example number 2. 3/5, 4/5, and x. Again, x is the hypotenuse because it is opposite of the right angle. We're going to use a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I'm going to call 3/5 a and 4/5 b. Now, it doesn't matter which one you do. So a is 3/5 squared plus 4/5 squared equals x, which I'm going to say is c. So x squared. 3/5 squared. Now, if you do this on your calculator, you're going to put the whole fraction in parentheses. Now, if you do it by hand, you square the top and you square the bottom. So this would be 3 squared is 9 and 5 squared is 25. 4 squared is 16 and 5 squared is 25. This is equal to x squared. 9 over 25 plus 16 over 25. Now, if you don't know this, you can do this on your calculator. We get 25 over 25. Well, 25 over 25 is 1. So x squared equals 1. We don't want x squared, we will just want to find out what x is. So again, to undo something to the second power, we take the square root of both sides, and the x squared, the 2 cancels with the square root, so we just have x. the square root of 1 is 1. Now, when you take the square root of a number, usually you have a positive and a negative answer. However, since we're dealing with lengths and distances, all of these values will just be positive. Moving on to example number 3. Here I have a triangle and it's in a different position, but you can still see that here's the right angle and opposite of the right angle is our hypotenuse. So this one's C. We can call this one A and this one B. Now if you call this A and this B, you're still going to get the same answer. So again, here's our formula. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. A, I'm going to substitute, it's 5. B is my X this time. B is X and it gets squared. And C is 9. 9 gets squared. 5 squared is 25. X squared is X squared. And 9 squared is 81. We want to solve for X squared. So this is a positive 25. So we are going to subtract 25 from both sides. These will cancel. So X squared carries down. 81 minus 25 is 56. And now we're going to need to take the square root because we want to get rid of this power of 2. So the square root of both sides gives us X equals, and we're going to round to 1 decimal place, so to the 10th place. And we get 7.5. So B is 7.5, or X is 7.5. Example number 4. Here I don't have a triangle drawn. You could draw one if you want. A is the square root of 5 and C is the square root of 14. We want to find B. I'm going to draw this just so you have something to reference. So here is the right angle and C is always the longest side. So the square root of 14, A I'm going to call here, square root of 5, there's A, there's C, and I want to find B. So I'm going to use A squared plus B squared equals C squared again. So I have the square root of 5 squared plus B squared, which I don't know what it is, and C squared is the square root of 14. So square root of 14 squared. Just substitute for your variables. Square root of 5 squared is just 5. The squared and the square root cancel out. Carry down. Square root of 14 squared is just 14. The square root and the squared cancel out. Now we need to solve for B squared. We have to subtract 5 from both sides because 5 is positive, so the opposite would be subtract. Subtract. Those cancel. B squared equals 14 minus 5, which is 9. And then to take the square root of both sides. Square root, this gives us B by itself. So B equals 3. The square root of 9 is 3. Definition number 5. The converse of the Pythagorean theorem. If a triangle has sides of lengths A, B, and C, and A squared plus B squared equals C squared, then the triangle is a right triangle with hypotenuse C. These are all properties for right triangles. Vic number 1, we can use the converse to determine if a triangle is a right triangle. So that's the purpose of the converse of the Pythagorean theorem. And remember, the hypotenuse is always the largest or the longest side. Determine whether the given lengths can be sides of a right triangle. So here I have 1, 2, and 3. Now, if these are sides of the right triangle, then A squared plus B squared equals C squared will be true. So I'm going to call, it doesn't matter which one you call A and B, as long as C is the hypotenuse. So 3 is the biggest, so C is going to be 3. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So I have 1 squared plus 2 squared equals 3 squared. 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, and 3 squared is 9. 1 plus 4 is 5. 5 is not equal to 9, so no, it's not a right triangle. "16, 34, and 30. 34 is the longest side, so that's going to be my C. Just like here, 3 was the biggest, so 3 was C. Again, we're using a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and I'm going to substitute. 16 squared plus 30 squared equals 34 squared. 16 squared is 256. 30 squared is 900. And 34 squared is 1,156. Combine these. 256 plus 900 is 1,156. 1,156 is equal to 1,156. So yes, it is a right triangle. Yes. Okay. Example number 7. 1, 1, and the square root of 2. Square root of 2 is bigger than 1, so this is my C. So I have 1 squared plus 1 squared equals the square root of 2 squared. 1 squared is 1, 1 squared is 1, and square root of 2 squared is 2. 1 plus 1 is 2, and 2 equals 2. So yes, this is a right triangle. Application. So here's a word problem involving Pythagorean theorem. A pigeon leaves its nest in New York City and flies 5 kilometers due east. The pigeon then flies 3 kilometers due north. How far is the pigeon from its nest? So I've drawn a diagram so that you can see what has happened. Here's the pigeon, and it flew 5 kilometers east, 3 kilometers north. And we're asked, how far is the pigeon from its nest? So now the pigeon is here, and it started here. So we're looking for this distance, and you can see it's opposite of our right angle, so we're looking for our hypotenuse. A squared plus b squared equals c squared is Pythagorean theorem. 5 squared, because here's 5. That can be a or b, so we're going to call it a. And 3 is b. X is our c. So 5 squared plus 3 squared equals x squared. 5 squared is 25. 3 squared is 9. And our c, we said is x. X squared is x squared. 25 plus 9 is 34. Carry down the x squared. Must take the square root of both sides to get rid of this squared on the x. So those cancel out. And if you type in your calculator and round to 1 decimal place, the square root of 34 is 5.8 kilometers. So the pigeon is 5.8 kilometers from its nest.